My name's Cameron Petrie, and this is Augusta McMahon. We are both lecturers in the Department of Archaeology, and if you come to study archaeology in Cambridge, you will encounter us in various different ways, shapes and things. But what we're going to do over the next sort of 45 minutes session or so is to give you a broad introduction to the subject of archaeology, and we're going to introduce you to how we present archaeology at the University of Cambridge, both in the very first year and in second and third years as well. And in the process of that, we'll hopefully give you a broad oversight in the range of subject areas that we consider, the ways that we approach the subject broadly, and also we'll sort of round up at the end by giving you some idea of what happens after that and some indications about the application procedure as well. But the important point to know is that in Cambridge now you can apply to study a degree in archaeology as part of a distinctive tripos, and we offer a range of subjects within that broad overarching subject. But the key point that I hope we will emphasise between us is that within this broad subject heading of archaeology, we offer a huge range of choice and variety in terms of the types of subjects that you can put together to study within archaeology and the connections that you can make to other areas as well. So in general, we think archaeology is a subject which is in many ways fundamental to understanding who we are as humans. It's a subject that investigates human history in a very, very broad chronological depth, and it tries to understand human populations of the past in order to help us understand human populations of the present in their full sort of global diversity. And archaeology is in many ways quite specific in the sense that in many people's minds they consider it to be a humanity, but it actually sits right on the edge between humanities and sciences. So we combine all sorts of different scientific methods and techniques. We look at aspects of social theory and social practice from humanities-based disciplines. So we very much bridge these two areas, and by our very nature we're very, very collaborative in the types of work that we engage in as well. So very much the sorts of things that fall under archaeology is, in terms of subjects, is almost anything that considers human past, human origins and other sorts of things. So things like anthropology, archaeology, biological anthropology, art history, evolutionary studies, social theory, and the science that underpins different disciplines and subjects within that area are all sort of brought together within this overarching heading of archaeology. And as a subject, we attempt to integrate with all these different areas and integrate the sort of knowledge base that you need to know to sort of bring together practical approaches and ways of thinking about different questions and issues in the past. And we combine this quite specifically with lots of opportunities to do field work and also to engage in laboratory research, as well as more conventional lecture type situations where people stand up and talk to you like I'm doing right at the moment. So one of the key sort of aspects of archaeology that's critically important is this concept of time depth. So our idea of what archaeology is, and certainly the way that we present it to students, is to really look at the origins of modern humans, so going all the way back 200,000 years ago, to understand the development of the modern human species and how that human species effectively evolved and developed, settled across the entire planet, and engaged in all sorts of complex social behaviours that we're engaged in. So we're, at a fundamental level, we're different to sort of history as you sort of understand it from what you learn at school, whereas history is primarily text-based. We're very much a prehistoric discipline in the sense that we consider a much longer time period, but we also consider historic periods as well. So just because people start using texts to record information doesn't mean that archaeologists stop paying attention. So there's actually a substantial overlap between archaeology and history, but archaeology is considerably more interested in sort of deeper time depth and trying to understand change over time and over process. Another sort of fundamental aspect of archaeology that's actually gradually being accepted as being something that is of interest to people like historians and art historians is this idea of material culture. So archaeology very much involves the study of things, the material culture that we produce, the stuff that we carry around with us, the types of buildings that we live in, the types of clothes that we wear. Hello, come in. And we use the analysis of this sort of material that we produce and use to gain understanding of the way that people engage in trade relations, the way that they arrange their social relationships, economic activities, politics, and various sorts of other things. And if you think about it, I mean, as a modern population, we actually use material culture to say something about ourselves, whether it be identity or social meaning or other sorts of things. This is characterised by the types of hats people wear or don't wear, the types of shirts and clothing that they wear, whether children at school wear uniforms or not, and why they do those sorts of things. Issues of uniforms for that are related to military or politics or various sorts of other things, and the types of objects that people choose to decorate themselves with actually provide us with information about their society, their economy, and particularly about the types of choices that they make. And all those things give us insight into how things change over time. So in general, we regard archaeology as a discipline that is very much of the past, but it's also of the present. So it provides us with all sorts of insights into our modern world, how it is that we got there, and it also has resonance in terms of all sorts of important political issues, such as who owns the past, who writes the narrative about the past, who specifically owns World Heritage, what do we do in a situation where World Heritage is endangered, for example. And we consider all sorts of other issues that are important for understanding how we need to act and behave in the modern world. For example, there are instances of the past where human populations, and in many cases human societies, have had to deal with instances of climatic change, whether that's human-induced change or environmentally induced change. And some of the interesting questions to consider is how humans responded to that sort of change. And were they successful? Were their decisions useful or not useful? And all those sorts of things are enabling us to sort of consider our modern context and really to consider the types of situations that we're in and the types of decisions that we might be able to make. Now, as a course within archaeology, we actually, as I said at the beginning, we offer this wide range of choice and a great degree of diversity in terms of the subjects that we offer. So within the core archaeology degree, when you have a look at your prospectus for the university or the course materials that we offer, you'll see that we actually offer 7 separate subjects that you can choose from in the first year of the archaeology degree. So there is a considerable degree of choice and flexibility, but we don't just say, oh, just choose 4 random subjects. We try and help guide you in the types of combinations of things that you can choose. So what we're going to do, Augusta and myself, are going to sort of briefly talk through each of the options just to give you a bit of a flavour of what it is that we mentioned. The other thing that is possible within our degree is it's also possible to borrow subjects from other courses, particularly human, social and political sciences. You can take first year classes in social anthropology, sociology or politics. And it's also possible to take a course in psychology from the PBS degree. So there's both flexibility within our degree, but also across into other degrees as well. So we like to sort of think of that as a sort of nice way of thinking about it, as the course itself being quite diverse. So, and like I say, within the structure itself, there's quite a degree of diversity. So if, for example, you have an interest in archaeology as a subject quite broadly, and you want to take combinations of subjects, say for example in world archaeology or practical applications of archaeology, biological anthropology, you can choose to focus on 4 courses directly within our archaeological stream. Or if you're actually interested in what is in effect an archaeology and anthropology degree, you can actually build an archaeology and anthropology degree that combines archaeology, biological anthropology and social anthropology as distinct subject areas. And all that's possible within the first year. One of the things, so in many ways that actually makes us a little bit different to a lot of other universities within Britain. Another thing that makes us distinctive is the opportunity to focus on Mesopotamian archaeology and Egyptology, and particularly the study of the languages of those two regions as well. So it is possible, as Augusta will explain, to take combinations of subjects that allow you to focus on world archaeology and the archaeology of Mesopotamia and Egypt, and to dabble in a bit of language, or you can choose to focus on the language and archaeology of Mesopotamia almost completely, and dabble in a bit of other types of archaeology. So these are the types of varieties of subjects that you are able to put together in your first year. Now, just to give you a bit of an insight into what all these subjects are about and why we break them up into these different clusters, I'm going to just briefly talk to you about what we would have referred to in the course codes as A1 and A2. These are two sort of core archaeology papers that we offer. Now, the real names of them is World Archaeology and Archaeology in Action. Now, effectively, these are what we regard as the sort of the core courses that give you the broad introduction to world archaeology in the first instance as we see it, to try and give you an insight into the evolution of modern humans, how human populations change over time, how human societies have changed over time, how those societies were varied across space, and the types of decisions that people made, and very much base all of this in discussions of critical themes of development and the types of theory that underpins our understanding of these sorts of changes in human societies and human life. And also we try and link that with the types of archaeological practices that archaeologists engage in the field and in the laboratory. And that's one of the critical things that, in many respects, that marks out the difference between these two courses, World Archaeology and Archaeology in Action. World Archaeology is primarily a lecture-based course, which involves some museum practicals, whereas Archaeology in Action is more of a sort of a practical-based course, which involves fieldwork components, travelling out to archaeological sites, and engaging in training excavations, and generally gaining insight into the sort of practical applications of archaeology as well. And so within these subjects, we're fundamentally interested in addressing and posing to you a number of big questions that we're interested in within archaeology. So, we're interested in understanding what are the biological origins of humans, how humans spread out and occupied the planet. And if you've been following the news, you'll be aware that although we have an understanding of where humans come from and how those processes evolved over time, our understanding of these processes is constantly changing with new discoveries in different locations, both within Africa, within Europe, and within other parts of the world. So this sort of period of trying to understand these early phases of human history is certainly nothing that's fixed and static, but it's something that's constantly changing and evolving. We're also interested in the transformations of early populations into sedentary populations or more elaborate states and ultimately empires. And to do this, we're sort of interested in considering factors like the origins of the modern diet and how diverse the diet is across the planet. We're also interested in investigating how people's lives changed when they started to do things like domesticate plants and animals, and the types of opportunities that created in terms of new types of social behaviour, the ability to have spare time to create things like monuments, and various sorts of other dynamics that result from the evolution of these sorts of social structures as well. And this, in many ways, also leads to the types of complex societies whereby we see transformations in the way that people live, we see the rise of things like social inequality, we see the development of leadership, the creation of the earliest sorts of states and ultimately empires. And we really pose the questions, about looking at empires at various scales, looking at an empire in terms of how it operates as a political entity, but also trying to understand how an empire impacted upon the lives of small-scale societies and, in many ways, ordinary people as well. So I'm just going to hand you over to Augusta now, who's just going to speak to you briefly about some more of the subjects that we have on offer.
So I'm going to talk to you briefly about at Assyriology and Egyptology. So that's basically ancient Egypt, not modern Egypt. And Assyriology covers Mesopotamia, so that's sort of the areas of Iraq, Syria, bits of Turkey, bits of Iran. And what we have here is it's unusual in the UK in terms of archaeology and Assyriology being embedded within the archaeology department rather than being in a sort of Oriental studies and a language-based department. And there's some special reasons for that. In case you don't know what these are, right? Everyone knows where Egypt is. Mesopotamia is often like a little bit more unclear because for various reasons, and it doesn't really correspond as much to our modern national boundaries. But this is roughly where they are. And also, as well as these two areas, of course, Egypt and Mesopotamia are, for most of the time, they're actually operating as ancient cultures. Of course, they're in conflict and competition to actually control the area in between. So there's actually quite a lot of Levantine archaeology sort of subsumed underneath these two. And so we do actually connect very much. In terms of the reasons why Egypt and Mesopotamia are so important, I mean, you've probably seen, there's a lot of firsts in terms of Egypt and Mesopotamia, where a lot of the sort of current modern concepts and structures and processes and so on are actually established back in, most of the time in Mesopotamia, not in Egypt. I'm a Mesopotamian archaeologist, so I always say Mesopotamia gets all this stuff first. But our very first cities are actually show up in Mesopotamia in the 4th millennium, and they're an incredibly successful settlement format, despite all of the enormous challenges and problems. When you look at sort of modern city living, you can actually sort of, it's quite astonishing how successful cities are. We can track some of these problems actually back to the very first cities that we have. Right? The first writing, arguably, there's sort of, it's a sort of proto-cuneiform, early Sumerian, and very early hieroglyphs in Egypt were actually invented independently at about the same time for very different reasons. So it's very interesting to actually compare and contrast Egypt and how that worked out. The first states, first monumental architecture, of course you all know the pyramids and that, and a lot of other things which actually still impact our daily lives, like the very first irrigation, the first sort of ways of maximizing agricultural products from the landscape, which enabled surpluses, which then enabled things like cities to develop, and also people to sort of spend time not farming and invent things like mathematics and other sort of technological inventions. So Egypt and Mesopotamia are absolutely fascinating sort of case studies. In fact, for a lot of the larger themes and questions and issues that Karen was telling you about that we look at in A1 and A2. The other things we have, let me read this, right? They're both, there's a lot of similarities between Egypt and Mesopotamia, which also helps us in terms of sort of building a case study and building larger sort of body of knowledge within which you can then actually assess and think about these different questions. So they are actually both river-based and have a very strong sort of agricultural but also pastoral base to them. They're both literate cultures. Of course, I haven't gotten to the language yet, but I will. It's an absolutely fascinating set of studies to compare and contrast what the texts say about a culture and then what the archaeological record says. And often they're very comparable, where you can get something that appears in the text and you can actually see something which seems to correspond to that in the archaeological record, but often they're completely astray. So often you get something where there's a text which says, oh, a battle happened here and an entire city got wiped out. You can find the actual city on the ground and there's absolutely no indication that the city was ever abandoned, destroyed at the right time period. So it's a sort of interesting battle often between the sort of the text and the archaeological record. And as I said before, they're often, we study these two cultures together because they're very closely associated in terms of cultural and social and political history. There are some differences though. Mesopotamia has a very complicated political history with sort of constant changes of dynasties, whereas Egypt's dynastic record in political history tends to be a little bit more stable. Mesopotamia is very open to all kinds of migration, immigration, migration outwards and so on. So there's a constantly changing population there, which then affects the political history. Whereas Egypt is much more stable in terms of politics. Mesopotamia has incredibly rich urban archaeology. The preservation of sites there is very good. Whereas Egypt, a lot of the sort of smaller settlements tend to be sort of wiped away by Nile flooding, so that what is best preserved there in terms of the archaeological record are the permanent sort of funerary monuments, the pyramids, the big stone temples, and so on. And again, in terms of the textual documentation, Mesopotamia invents texts essentially for economics. They write things, and the very first texts we have are basically receipts, like a kind of shopping receipt you get around in the Tesco's. It's exactly what they did for hundreds and hundreds of years. So then we have a lot of economic texts from Mesopotamia, and then they diverge out into sort of literary texts like the Epic of Gilgamesh and so on. Whereas the reason that writing seems to be invented in Egypt is more about religious, funerary, ideological reasons. So there is interesting contrast in terms of the text. In terms of how we actually do Egypt and Mesopotamia at Cambridge, I said we're unique in terms of being embedded within archaeology. We're also unique in combining language and archaeology together. Most other universities in the UK, the language is in one department and archaeology is somewhere else. And you have to really fight sometimes to actually integrate the two together. That said, you can actually take all three things separate. So you can do Egyptian archaeology in the first, or no, you can do Egyptian language in the first tier without actually doing the archaeology. If you're not really interested in it, you just want to try it out. We encourage you to take actually some archaeology to put the Egyptology into context, but you don't have to. And you can of course take the archaeology without the language without the archaeology. But the best degree actually does merge one and the other. If you're very, very brave, you can in fact take Assyriology, Egyptology, and archaeology all together. So you can take both ancient Egyptian and Akkadian at the same time. That's really only recommended if you're very, very strong in languages, because they're both very challenging, difficult languages to get your head around. But that is actually possible. Again, that's unique to Cambridge. So we integrate language and archaeology, and within archaeology, also all kinds of aspects to it. And the key thing is we also have this fabulous museum collections as well that you're encouraged to go to. But the key thing is that often in both of these cultures, the text and the actual artifacts or materials are often inseparable anyway. So it's incredibly awkward just to learn the language without the archaeology, or just to learn the archaeology without the language. So you've got things like, this is a Mesopotamian sort of very early land sale document with representations of the actual individuals involved in the land sale on it, and then inscriptions which actually give the name of the person and what they're doing and so on. And so you can't really work with one without the other. And Egypt as well, it's this sort of tomb painting which has a description of some interesting things. I don't know, I'm not an Egyptologist, right? So there are fabulous interesting things, and then the actual tomb owner and so on. Anyway, there's this combination of text and archaeology together in terms of a lot of the artifactual and architectural record, which makes it just makes sense to actually look at them together. In terms of the actual courses, so Cameron is telling you about A1 and A2. A3 is our introduction to Egypt and Mesopotamia, all of Mesopotamian and all of Egyptian history, archaeology, and so on. Combination of lectures. There are also some seminars, supervision, museum visits, and so on. Looking at that, not only a sort of chronological run-through, so you have a kind of framework for thinking about things, but also sort of key themes which very much overlap and connect with some of the themes in A1 that Karen was telling you about. Particularly things like religious belief, identity, ethnicity, where leadership actually comes from and how power is held and developed, trade and resources and interconnections around these regions, and all this sort of fabulous ideological symbolism that we get in all of our works. Then there are the two language courses, and as I said, you can take these with or without the archaeology. We encourage you to, if you're interested in the language, to take the archaeology to put it in its setting, but you don't have to. In the first year Akkadian, you go very, very rapidly from the sort of first term is mostly about grammar and structure and learning cuneiform signs and learning the transcription of those cuneiform signs. But by the time you get into sort of the second half of the first term, and then into the second term, you're already reading ancient texts. Not in the original, usually in copy, but also in casts, and eventually you can impress your friends by going around to the British Museum and reading things right off of the actual material that's there. So the key texts for this, if you are interested, Akkadian is divided up into multiple different dialects. There's a sort of northern and a southern version of the dialects, and they also change over time. So you're introduced gradually to these. The easiest, the easiest Akkadian is actually that that's found in the early second millennium. So you actually start out with this thing called the Law Code of Hammurabi, which is one of the world's earliest codifications of social law. That is actually a picture of it. It's in the Louvre right now. So that's how you sort of get into it. You learn the script and you learn the language through that. But by very, very rapidly, you're reading the Annals of Sennacherib, who is a Neo-Assyrian king of the first millennium, and this is essentially a historical text, sort of military history text. So that's what you're basically doing in the first year of Akkadian language learning, through a combination of lectures, but also sort of text reading classes where you're given a text or a chunk of a text, you take it home, and you translate, you transliterate, you translate, and then you come back and you discuss it. And Egyptian language is very much the same. So again, you start out with lectures on the grammar and the structure, and then learning the hieroglyphs and so on, and then very rapidly you're again actually reading hieroglyphs. And so again, these are the sort of the key texts which ease you gradually into the subject, the more sort of simpler ones. Again, it's a combination of lectures, text reading classes where you have a text and you go home and prepare, come back, and so on. And you start out also with Middle Egyptian, which is, that's meant to be the simplest of all of the multiple dialects and versions of ancient Egyptian language. Yes. If you're interested, we have a special leaflet. If you've been around to the law faculty, we have leaflets for archaeology, biology, anthropology, and then this one that actually has the two.
Right, so in addition to the sort of the two A1 and A2 World Archaeology and Archaeology in Action, and the 3 papers on Egypt and Mesopotamia, we also offer another sort of slightly more specialised paper in the first year, which is effectively a sort of introduction to biological anthropology, which is called Humans in a Biological Perspective. And by and large, this is an attempt to provide a sort of a more biological approach to human history rather than a sort of material-based approach, but it does integrate material as well, with a specific way of trying to answer this sort of question: why are humans the way that we are? And in many ways, biological anthropology possibly pushes the sort of deep history of archaeology even further into the past by understanding early human origins and various sorts of other things. And in many ways, one of the fundamental tenets of the way that we teach biological anthropology here is based around the principles of evolution, and the argument in many ways that nothing really makes sense unless you understand, nothing within biology makes sense unless you understand the fundamental tenets of evolution and evolutionary change in humans. So very much biological anthropology is in itself quite a diverse subject in terms of the range of different areas of interest that are combined within one subject to understanding human history. So in many respects there's a sort of evolutionary and genetic history to humans that is sort of investigated within the structures of biological anthropology, but that also moves through sort of other sort of more comparative approaches to look at, for example, near neighbours within to human species, to understand how they have evolved and are adapted to ecological circumstances and how they behave, and thereby gain some understanding of the early phases of human behavioural evolution from some of our nearest ancestors, and looking all the way up to the way that modern human societies exist now, and how factors like diet affect modern human populations, how diseases spread, and all sorts of other aspects of the way that biology impacts upon us as human beings and our human societies. So effectively, biological anthropology is really focused on sort of 3 core questions. One, what is it that makes us human? What is it about our cognitive capabilities that differentiate us from other animal species on the planet? How do we structure our societies? How do we structure the way that we think? What are the sort of fundamental tenets of language, and how are they sort of related to the internal structures of the brain, for example? Biological anthropology also makes quite careful consideration of why it is, as a human species, do we vary? Why do we have different hair colour, skin colour, eye colour, and stature, for example? And so very much sort of how are those sort of aspects of us as entities passed down through generations, and how do they evolve and how do they change? And also considerations of sort of fundamental aspects of sex and gender within those sorts of questions as well. And biological anthropology is also specifically related to this issue of humans interacting with their environment, whether that be sort of ecological adaptations, how they adapt and survive through instances of disease, for example, how they occupy different parts of the planet, and the impacts of modern behaviour on human health and well-being and various sorts of other things. So in many ways, if you sort of think about these questions and think back to what I was talking about not so long ago in relationship to the World Archaeology paper and the Archaeology in Action paper, you can see that inevitably, within all of the papers that we're talking about, there's a thematic overlap in terms of the types of questions that we ask, types of chronological periods that we're interested in, various sorts of other things. So very much, biological anthropology is quite closely focused on this relationship between the biological aspects and the processes of evolution that operate and how they interdigitate together. And it combines a whole series of methods that are fundamental methods within archaeology, but also bridge between archaeology and anthropology. So there are components of archaeological excavation which inform all of the different sorts of research questions and topics that we investigate within archaeology. But biological anthropology also quite overtly engages in a comparative analysis of other species and really tries to characterise aspects of modern genetics, modern populations, modern population behaviour, and other sorts of things as well. And the last paper that I'm going to introduce you to is actually called Being Human, which is very much an attempt by us to try and integrate all of the different themes and aspects that we teach you within the introductory year, but to try and put this to you in an overtly integrated and linked up perspective with all the different sort of component disciplines. So, for example, we'll investigate themes like food and what food means in biological terms, what food means in social terms, what it might mean skeletally, how food is managed, how food is produced. So taking sort of themes that cut across all the different aspects of archaeology, Egyptology, Assyriology, biological anthropology, and more broad anthropology as disciplines, and sort of link those themes together as a way of giving you insight into what it is that makes us humans and how human behaviour is operationalised and manifested in the sorts of things that we do, the sorts of things that we present to the archaeological record. So, in a sense, that gives you a flavour of the different courses that we offer within archaeology, but it's also useful to sort of give you a little bit of an insight into what happens after the first year if you decide to come and study with us. So effectively, our sort of theme of variation and diversity and choice continues once you move out of the first year of archaeology. So in the second year and the third year here in Cambridge, it's possible to specialise within a broad range of different areas within this subject of archaeology. So you can focus specifically on traditional archaeology, you can focus on biological anthropology, or you can take a combined degree that mixes the two together. It's also possible to take a combination of a degree that mixes archaeology and the study of Egypt and Mesopotamia, or if you want, you can quite explicitly focus on language study within the course. So that includes the combined study of the languages of Egypt and Mesopotamia, which Augusta mentioned, or a quite explicit focus on Egyptian language and culture, or Akkadian or Mesopotamian language and culture as well. So you can see that these are quite specific areas of specialisation, but nonetheless, you can sort of see how combinations of subjects can be brought together into some quite coherent clusters as well. Now, some of the aspects that underlie all of the things that we offer to you within archaeology is this fundamental balance between taught lectures, practicals in museums, practicals in laboratories, field trips, museum visits, fieldwork projects that you go off and do in the summer, training excavations, and ultimately at the end of your third year, the opportunity to write a piece of your own research on a topic of your own interest, which usually takes the form of a research dissertation. And all of these things are sort of encapsulated within the various structures that we have within archaeology generally. Now, archaeology at Cambridge is actually quite a substantial department in terms of the members of staff. And we have 20 members of academic staff that teach subjects that broadly cover all of the different regions of the planet. And we also have a substantial archaeological community here of researchers who might be postdoctoral level or engaging in PhD research, master's research, or even undergraduate student research. And many of these projects are operating in Europe or around the Mediterranean, but we also have people engaging in actual field archaeology in different regions across the world. And particularly in the summer between second and third year, students get the opportunity to travel and go off and spend up to 4 weeks on an archaeological project somewhere, and we provide support to do that. And hopefully we can match up your interests with some of the projects that we have on offer. And I guess what all this is for and why you might be interested in doing it. So in many respects, archaeology at a fundamental level teaches you a whole range of skills that are applicable more broadly in life. Being in Cambridge also creates a whole range of sort of specific opportunities. But within archaeology, we train you quite specifically at learning how to interpret questions, learning how to collect information, learning how to collect data and manage that data, engage in oral discussions with your peers and also with academics. So the Cambridge supervision system involves quite close interaction where you engage in discussions about topics that are of interest to you. We encourage sort of lateral and critical thinking rather than sort of rote learning as a method. You get good at writing reports, you get good at addressing questions. Working together as a part of a team is in many ways a critical aspect of archaeological work, particularly in the field. And we also create the opportunities for you to engage in practical field work and laboratory work. None of these things are sort of strictly compulsory, and by and large what we try and do is give everyone a taste of everything, and then when it moves to the stage of specialisation you get to choose things that are more suited to your own interests. In general, we think that graduates in archaeology are incredibly flexible, generally usually quite intelligent people. They're capable of being very creative and independent-minded, and they're usually quite highly motivated. And in some ways, in reflecting the flexibility that is offered within our course, we also feel that students that do well in archaeology are versatile and flexible in terms of the way that they think. They can analyse material, they can engage in critical thinking and critical discussion. But in some ways, one of the aspects that's very, very important in the modern world is to have a sort of keen understanding of human variety and human variation, and how multicultural and diverse we are, and why it's important to sort of have a keen understanding of how we end up in our modern social structures as well. So one of the things we know is that also in many ways there's a sort of strange perception of what archaeology is, and a strange perception of what you might go on to do if you do archaeology as a degree. But by and large what we do know is that we have an incredibly diverse range of people that come in to study archaeology, and those people go on into an incredibly diverse range of areas of future employment. So many of the students that come in do choose to continue on in archaeology. Many stay at university, but a large number go on to teach at schools. There's quite a substantial number of people that go off to work in aid and development. Other sorts of aspects, I don't necessarily need to read them all out, but I guess the key thing is, in many respects, what we provide for you in Cambridge in the archaeology course is a grounding that sets you up for a whole range of different options as you go forward into the future. So with any luck, what we've spoken to you about over the last 40 minutes or so has given you a nice taster of what it is that we offer here in Cambridge. If you'd like to sort of hear more, there's a sample lecture that's on at 2:45, which is on in the McDonald Institute for Archaeological Research, and I believe you've got maps, and if anyone has any questions, we can point you in the right direction. But this is a paper by Professor John Robb, who's going to be talking about violence in the past and the degree to which people did or did not engage in violence as well. And after the sample lecture, there's also a tour of the facilities in the Department of Archaeology, so you can get a bit of an idea of what it is that's there and what it is that we offer. If you have any specific questions or you'd like some more specific information, we have a Facebook page, we have a Twitter feed, we have our own videos that are being produced before you at the moment, and we also have we have also the Cambridge Archaeology website, which provides hopefully all the information that you need, but it also gives you a redirection to an inquiry email address if you have any specific queries. But if you are interested, we have a very distinctive and unique UCAS code that helpfully appears right at the top of the list, so it's very, very easy to find. And I guess there's all sorts of information about various other aspects of personal statements and various other things that you may well have heard about today. And I'm just going to leave that up there for now.